Welcome, Brandon. Thanks for being here.
Hey, thanks for having me, Swanigan. How's it going?
Yeah, man, it's going pretty well. So let's jump into the questions. I see that you're the chair of the Industrial Advisory Board for Indiana State University. How did that come about?
So I worked for my alma mater as a graduate assistant when I was getting my graduate degree. Then obviously went into industry, and eventually, moved out of the region. COVID hit. They had the opportunity to increase the remote asynchronous hours they were able to offer. Some, older faculty was on their way out. And so the department was very much looking for, people who could hit the ground running, and could handle, the asynchronous kind of remote workload. And so at the time, I was working for Stanley Black and Decker, and I decided, hey, I can do that when they reached out. And so I was an adjunct for them for, I believe, 5 semesters or 4 semesters roughly. Probably taught, 8 to 10, maybe 12 courses over that time. And then, I had a child recently. I had my son about 16 months ago now. And so, just before he was born, I told the department, hey, in fairness, I really don't know that I can contribute at a, acceptable level. So I think that now is when I get off of the adjunct train. We had a new department chair who was incoming. We discussed things, and he offered me an opportunity to join his industrial advisory board. And I did. He heard from other faculty what my opinions on things, and heard the rigor and experience I bring to my classroom, and so he wanted to retain that knowledge and try to fan it out. And so I joined the industrial advisory board for the electronics and computer engineering technology department of Indiana State.
Awesome, man. So when you're in those meetings, from a gap analysis standpoint, what are you promoting from the industry that you're hoping that the higher education side will adopt and push in their programs?
It's a moving target. It's really hard to hit because by the time, academia is slow. It's no different than any enterprise organization. It's a big ship. It takes a while to turn. And so by the time you've turned, your target's already somewhere else. And so it's kind of like playing darts blindfolded and the dartboard's moving. But you just, you do your best. You throw the dart. When the dart lands, you pop the blindfold up and look and say, ooh, it's over there now. Pull it back down and throw it again.
Yeah,
That's all you really can do. And so we just,
yeah,
we stay engaged as much as we can. We continue to bring in new technologies. Right now, they're working through a lot, focus more on the generative AI field. I think everybody is looking into generative AI. And
yeah.
so they're wanting to put together their own little chat bot to answer, boilerplate questions that prospective students may have about the department. What is the placement rate? What courses are offered? What paths, yada, yada. All the boilerplate questions that traditionally, someone would need to take, 5, 10, 15 minutes per student to kind of answer and resolve those. And so they're really trying to take technology and augment not only a reduced staff, because as you know, all of academia is being asked to do more with less. And so they're not only looking to leverage that technology, at the same time, they want to have the students very involved in implementing that technology and, updating it as new things become available. I think there's a lot of other technologies they're focused on, but just, again, the pulse right now, everybody's talking about generative AI and the savings and value it can bring, academia and industry.
Yeah, definitely. So, just to kind of segue for a second, from a practical standpoint, as you work in industry, what are some practical applications of some of these large language models that you've found so far as traverse the new landscape?
So I've only ever seen one that I said, wow, now that's an interesting application of this. I'm not saying that more don't exist, but there's just so much to do in industry and in technology in general, and you can only focus on so much. And I'll be honest, LLMs, AI, it's very interesting, but I don't get super deep in the weeds. Now that
Yeah.
said, I did see a product that was shown to us by a vendor at the Rockwell Automation Fair.
Hmm.
So a few of us got a closed session demo to see where they had taken an LLM, and augmented their historian and alarms and events database. And they've also tied it to an internal knowledge base. So they've enabled, higher level
Wow.
people in the organization to say, What was my parts produced yesterday? Okay, what was my biggest downtime? Why? And then from there, it actually showed, hey, this was why. And then they were able to pivot right into an internal bulletin that showed a technician how to resolve or how to fix these, issues that can kind of bring down their uptime. And again, I was more technically hands-on. I would see more, but I got to admit,
Yeah.
I'm very knowledgeable about setting up historians, very knowledgeable about alarms and events,
Right.
systems. And I thought this was a great thing. You no longer need to look at it. You just, I mean, the gentleman interacted with it directly via, just a standard web prompt. And in
Yeah.
just, 30 seconds, he drilled down to a machine and was able to not only understand what was hurting it, but also have a resolution to move forward. And I think that that's
That's pretty
really for
awesome.
LLMs. And again, I'm not an expert, but in my opinion, I think that's a really good application of LLMs. And I think that's what we're going to see in industry is how do we use them to do, junior level tasks and augment them in a very rapid manner. I personally have used it as a chat GPT LLM as a like a junior developer, if you will.
Yeah.
Hey, I
Yeah.
have this very manual thing I need to convert from one language to another. Please do this for me. But again, take it with a grain of salt. And then I went back as the code review senior dev to say, oh, okay, this isn't exactly what I asked you for. Maybe that's on me. Maybe you hallucinated. I don't know. But I do think that that's where we're heading. And I think if you're
Yeah.
not using tools like that to augment yourself, I use ChatGPT often, but if you're not using stuff like that, you're going to get left behind. It's a fast pace, as you
Yeah.
know, out in industry, and the people who adopt those technologies, adopt them often, and try new things, they'll win at the end of the
Yeah.
day.
Yeah. Yeah. 100% agree, man.
Yeah,
And it's
100%
something I
agree, man.
use every day. You got to be very careful about the output. Like you can't, like you said, you can't trust it like explicitly as far as whatever you get out, you can't use it. It's better to treat it as something that an unskilled person would have outputted, and you have to go back and check, just make sure that everything's okay. Yeah. 9 times out of 10, I don't take the output as is and just use it. I always have to modify it a little bit, but it is extremely powerful for sure. Pivot for a second, and we'll go to maybe the cybersecurity side, which I know is one of your kind of passions or something you're really good at anyway, or have a lot of knowledge about. Yeah, so we're starting to see a lot more incidents in the past, and I saw a really interesting metric, which is in the last 3 years, the total number of OT, ICS, cybersecurity incidents have exceeded the total number reported basically in the last 15 years combined. So that's pretty wild. And I can only imagine it's going to keep exponentially going higher as a lot of these legacy systems start coming online, that aren't particularly hardened. So from your standpoint, what's your take on that? The landscape, and maybe we could pivot into what are some tactical ways you're thinking about some of these companies can use to, in the short term, make their systems better protected.
I mean, I think there's a multitude of things that you've got to do. I think some of the lower hanging fruit is really easy stuff. Adopt a standard. I
Yeah.
personally I like the NIST 800 framework. I think it's great. There's also models meant for more like aerospace, like the CMMC compliance model. But again, based on your industry, if there's not already a standard that's pushed on you by either a federal agency or someone you're supplying in goods to, I think adopting a standard that makes sense for your organization until that government or oversight committee has established this is the standard we use for food and bev, pharmaceutical, yada yada. I think adopting a standard and then doing just basic cyber hygiene. If you're not using multi-factor authentication, you need to. If everybody in your organization is not actively enrolled in an Active Directory so that if you terminate an employee, you can turn off their ability to access systems or open software. Those are the low hanging fruit. I think the more maybe deeper in the weeds technical things is doing actual audits with external partners. I know Dragos is big in the industry. I've seen a lot of other. Clarity was one I saw recently that had some good work done. But engaging with industry partners to do that audit process, whether that's just hey, these are our standards, what do you think? Or getting deeper in the weeds with actual penetration testing, things like that. But again, they would tell you if your cyber hygiene is poor, there's no value in doing the audit because they're just going to capture whatever the ROE said to capture and come back. So if you're not cyber hygiene clean to begin with, it's kind of wasting your time and your money. But then, deeper, I think doing things like honeypots are a great way to try and catch, malicious activity. Although I think that, the malware is getting smarter. And so I read an article recently for honeypot specifically where malware is now being created to see if the mouse movement in the honeypot is human. So using some vector analysis on mouse coordinates, they're able to say, hey, this mouse movement is not likely from a human. Stop all malicious activity. Monitor the mouse. And if the mouse ever goes back to likely a human, then execute. But that's where you are. I mean, you're creating a honeypot to catch them, but now they're aware you're creating honeypots, and more organizations are doing that. So now they're just rewriting the malware to look to see, is this a honeypot or a real system? And to your point earlier in the call, this back and forth is going to continue, and the value, unfortunately, is there for the nefarious party. I mean, you see these ransomware attacks, and they get paid. Sometimes, I think it was GE just the other day said, no, we're not paying, and they put out a bunch of GE aerospace data. But I'm glad, because if we continue to pay, I mean, it's a lucrative business, and it's it's not all that hard. And I recently read a lot of the malware we're seeing is literally older malware with small tweaks. Basically looking at how did this malware get stopped? Let's just tweak that again. The honeypot mouse movement thing. So they're really taking attacks they know work and just tweaking them to get around the rules that blue team set. And that's the whole nature of your red team, blue team is. The red team is constantly evaluating how did the blue team stop me and how do we adapt to that to get through. And conversely, the blue team is doing the same. But to your point, there's a lot of money in it, so we're going to see an increase, hopefully not at the same rate. Hopefully we slow down and we get to some point where we say, okay, this is the cybercrime saturation point. Now how do we get down from here? But as we connect more and more critical infrastructure, these attacks are going to have more and more real life. It's one thing to hear, oh, some company lost their data. It's another thing to lose your electricity or your heat in the middle of winter because the electric grid or the gas company have been brought down. That has real world consequences beyond just dollars and cents. So it's scary, but it's also a good challenge. It really puts the pressure on industry to adopt, again, a very clean hygiene with respect to these things. And we're seeing like the SolarWinds CTO, taking the heat for the hack there. And I think he's now facing criminal charges. So there's a report from the SEC, I think, about 80 pages, very much worth a read. But we're seeing companies who ignored glaring concerns of cyber vulnerabilities being brought to litigation for it and facing real world penalties. And so I think it's going to take more of that, but I'm glad to see that we're trying to force companies to do the right thing.
Yeah, it definitely is going to be a part of life now, I think, for any industrial facing company. One trend that I'm seeing is, you mentioned industry partners earlier. It seems like there's a trend towards, even in larger companies that have the headcount, is to move a lot of these. Like, for instance, if, say a Fortune 500 company had a cybersecurity department in the past, I'm seeing some trends moving to where it's these industry partners that are picking up that, that flag and running with it, where a company will just, contract with these companies to have that same functionality or, assessments or work or whatever it is to be done. Is that something you're seeing as well, to where it's moving out of in-house and more towards the, like a contracted work?
I think we're seeing a hybrid methodology being used. I think companies are still retaining in-house because at the end of the day, you have to own your own problems and you can't outsource everything. So you do need that internal, I hate to use the verbiage, but that internal throat to choke. You do need that person in-house to get, them to understand these are our constraints and have them be able to convey that technical analysis back to the the key parties. So I do think we're seeing a hybrid approach, and I think we're seeing companies like Dragos, Clarity, some of these others be used to augment technical staff and really help drive the deeper analysis. But I do think from the compliance and governance, we're still seeing a lot of that done in-house. So again, when it comes to writing documentation, which isn't as much fun, we're still doing that in-house. But when it comes to doing the fun stuff like breaking and entering, doing the red team capture, that kind of stuff, yeah, I think we're seeing that get outsourced. But you can't have everybody, right? One of the things people don't associate as much with cybersecurity is physical security or social engineering. And it's not realistic for every company to have someone on staff that, hey, this person could lockpick anything. They could get into anything physically. That's not realistic. But being able to leverage an industry partner who has somebody with physical access, like gentleman on LinkedIn is very good, Brian Harris, someone like that on your staff. No, it's likely not realistic unless you're a very large player. And you employ 100,000 plus. But having access to those, and maybe it's you have platform as a service, this is a service, that is a service. It's kind of like that technical security as a service. You're bringing in these people who are the respective SMEs and the various pillars of cybersecurity, and having them do that audit. And I think in doing that, you have the best opportunity to expose your blind spots, because as you've heard before, you don't know what you don't know. And if you don't have an expert on the team, you may have no clue how vulnerable you are. It may just be a 5-minute job for someone in the know. So, yeah, I think that's what we're seeing, is that more hybrid approach.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. I've also noticed there's a ton of open jobs in our field. We've been kind of talking broadly industrial and manufacturing, a little bit of cybersecurity, but we're both control systems engineers by trade. And there's just a ton of open jobs right now, and there's a lot of burnout control systems engineers, which I think we can both attest to, at some point in our journey. I'd be curious to see what kind of ideas you would have that would, you're seeing the higher education piece, which is trying to produce more of these skilled engineers. What are some ideas that you might have to attract more talent to this industry in specific, and how to keep people in it without burning out? Any thoughts there?
Yeah, I think I'll delineate the two questions. So the first is, how do we get them engaged and to join the industry, and then we'll come back to how do we keep them from burning out. But to get them engaged, it's really easy. I mean, make it meaningful and make it fun. At the end of the day, no one wants to go to work and do something they're not passionate about. To your point, I'm a control systems engineer by trade, but I'm more of a cybersecurity by degree. And that's because I find control systems to be very interesting. And I've noticed there's, a lack of communication between IT and OT, or ICS, however you want to phrase it. And I think making that meaningful and fun on the control side is how we incentivize kids to come back to academia. I think you could agree a lot of our talent pool is moving towards the trades, because, for years, or at least when I went through it, was, you have to have a college degree. Well, we've starved in the trades, and now this, the hourly rates we're paying for tradespeople is absurd. And so I hate to use the term, it's overused, but the value proposition of, college versus trades, it's really leaning heavily towards trades. And I can't be upset with these young generation that want to go into trades, because it makes sense. I can make more money long term. I don't have to have any skin in the game or any investment up front, and I can start making money now. And in this economy, I can fully understand that. But if we can make controls meaningful and fun, so that the people coming in feel like what they're doing matters, and they're having their voice heard, and ultimately they feel good when they leave. They feel a sense of accomplishment. I think that's how we get them to come in. Money would help. None of us dislike money, so that's one that obviously money will always help. But I think if you can make the work more meaningful and more fun up front, I think you can convince more and more to kind of jump headfirst into that realm. Now, the second question is, how do we avoid burnout? I really think it comes down to a work-life balance. I know organizations get behind with respect to project timelines and things like that, but it's really, if you're not careful with how hard you push technical staff, to use a control, nomenclature, it's a runaway feedback loop, right? You
Yeah,
you up the
exactly.
hours because you're behind, and then you burn out the resource more, and now their contribution isn't as good, and you keep doing that, and you have your feedback's going the wrong way. You have no control of your process, and to your
Yeah.
point, you burn out. And if you've ever experienced burnout in your career, you know it's a real thing. It takes a toll on your
It is.
body, and it's something you've got to be aware of. And I definitely think that part of avoiding burnout, it's not just the mental, it's the physical. I think
Hmm.
working long hours, you're at your desk, you're not moving, your blood's not pumping. I think a
Yeah.
lot of people are very sedentary. And I think, that work life balance, but beyond just how many hours a week do you work, it's also in the time you're not working, what are you doing? How are you helping your mental health? How are you helping your physical health?
Yeah.
I think that's how we avoid the long term burnout there. Because once you've burned out once, in my opinion, I think you're more susceptible to burnout unless you really try to address why did I burn out and really get vocal to protect yourself and advocate for yourself. Because again, if you're not burned out, in my opinion, your quality is much higher. You're
Yeah.
you're
Absolutely.
hungrier, you're happier to be at work, and you're a better teammate. And that's how organizations, I think, can combat it. But again, it's counterintuitive to operations people. I can recognize, hey, they've got a schedule, they got to keep it. But again,
Yeah.
if you're not careful and you try to force it, your feedback loop opens, and you just have a runaway process at that point.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. It's a nuanced topic. But yeah, I agree with everything you said. Yeah, it's having meaningful work that people feel appreciated for, and it's making it framing it in a way which it's really doesn't need a frame, but it's especially with controls work because it is interesting. I think as we can both agree, and there's a lot of really cool things you can do in the industry, but it's just framing it in that way that you can get that point across to people that don't necessarily know anything about it. Yeah, totally agree. Um, you kind of touched on working remotely a little bit, but what do you think it's possible to do this kind of work remotely? And for instance, like for a plant in a plant situation that has a maybe an air gapped control system, what kind of infrastructure would it take to support that remotely, and is that possible from your perspective?
I mean, that's kind of a tough question. I guess I'll take it and give context to it, but I think it's not a one
Yeah.
size fits all. Obviously, if it's a
Right.
air gapped, electric grid control or wastewater management, then there's maybe some reasons that remote doesn't make sense. But let's just stick with like
Right.
manufacturing in general. I think manufacturing in general can be done somewhat remotely from a control staff. Now, I don't mean that as much on the support side. I think that there is ability to remotely support with some of your more seasoned SMEs for just logic analysis. But at the end of the day, I think for support there is a lot of value in being there physically. Now, as long as the architecture that you build is secure and it adheres to, again, back to I think one of our first questions, the compliance model for security
Yeah.
for your organization. You have your traditional, I think it's a ISA 99, the Purdue
Yeah.
model. You have your jump host, you have a legitimate DMZ, and you have multi-factor authentication, RDP. As long as you set up all those security things right so that you're controlling who's coming into that DMZ, and then that OT network is built properly below the southbound firewall, I think that from a security standpoint, it is feasible. I think from doing it remote, it does tie into the previous question, that burnout, because if you're burned out, especially remote, you can kind of just zone out sometimes, and you're not
Yeah.
as, you're not as big of a contributor as you normally are. I think for the less thought of things, again, back to the health is, if you're going to work remote, I highly advise a standing desk, a good coffee maker, and great tunes.
Yeah.
Because one thing that happens a lot is, you get tired, there's your coffee maker. Again, to the physical health thing, if you're standing, your body takes less of an impact than if you sit all day. And I'm not saying stand all day. I think you and I have joked about watching The Office before. There's the
Yeah.
episode where Dwight is going to stand all the time, and he eventually has that like little, like crutch thing on his leg because he can't
Yeah,
do it. So
exactly.
I'm not by any means saying I stand all day, but have the
Right.
option and make sure
Yeah.
you're making yourself do that. But then once you do, as long as the tools that are available to your team are there, I doing like a digital twin for virtual commissioning, doing things like that remotely are very valid and very valuable. But I
Yeah.
don't think that any controls engineer is ever going to be 100% remote because again, the hands-on is a reality when you're a controls engineer. Whether that's
Absolutely.
5%, 10%, 25, 50, whatever percent of your time. I guess that's dependent on what it is you do and where you do. But I think it is possible to do it remotely, but again, only with an expectation of some on-site travel because technical things don't translate well over Teams, over Google,
Yeah.
over Zoom. And I think sometimes there's a lot of value in rolling up your sleeves, opening a cabinet and sitting there on the plant floor and watching the process and understanding it more deeply from that perspective.
Yeah. I think there's also a component to where you're going to get better information from the operations side. You're on site and you're showing that you're engaged and wanting to help. That doesn't necessarily come across, like you said in the Teams call. So yeah, I don't think it's ever, like you said, going to be 100% remote. But I think there's the way technology is moving, and if you do it safely, you can definitely do a hybrid situation very well. Yeah. To move on, you're one of only a couple engineers that I've met in my career so far that is both proficient in traditional IT, and industrial control systems engineering. That's a rare combo. So I'm excited that we're getting to talk about this stuff. But it seems to me that the future control systems engineer is going to have to be like you, essentially, in my opinion. So what makes how did you get to where you are as far as from that skill set, and how would you recommend that a training program to get new people that skill set as well?
I'm a non-traditional student, so I don't think I'd ask anyone to go down my path. It wasn't the most, the straightest line. There was some detours along the way that lasted longer than they should have.
Yeah.
But I think I was very interested in how things worked at a very young age. My first computer was Windows 3.1. It was an old Wang 8088. So I learned MS-DOS, and that was in the world of no mouse, at least for the MS-DOS side, command line only. So I got
Yeah.
to know computers on a very low level very early on in my life. My parents were also very big on educational things. So I'm sure you remember those like Radio Shack, like 301 boxes. Make a
Yep.
radio, make a remote control buzzer, yada yada. Yeah, very much played with those. And then when I went to college at 18, I went for electrical engineering, full visibility. I left. I didn't do well. I kind of bounced around the real world for 8 years, 9 years or so, and then one day said, "Oh, I got to go back to school. I can't be doing this anymore." But during
Yeah.
the 8 or 9 years, I never gave up the desire to want to know. I think from a cybersecurity standpoint, you would refer to me as a script kiddie. So very much like taking code off the internet and executing it without really understanding it or reviewing it as well as I should. My old credit cards are probably floating around somewhere on the internet because I made bad decisions when I was younger. But really, though, having that desire to want to know, and not just one thing, a wide variety of things, I think that's what we've really got to start pushing on students is, it's great to be an expert, but it's also, there's a lot of value in that being a jack of all trades, master of none, or master of some, if you will. And I think that that's how we get kids to have that blended ability. And I think we also have to do a good job in academia of exposing them to other verticals. I'm very proud of my alma mater, and I'm very proud of my department in specific. They have pretty much anything you would find in industry. at least from the electrical side, automation and controls, electronics engineering, IT, automate or computer engineering, and I'm pretty sure computer science is now merging with our department, if I'm not mistaken. Maybe I
Nice.
think it's maybe another year down the road, but still, getting all those cross-functional teams together that are going to work together in real-world industry, and then getting those students. Okay, you're an electronics student. All right, we want you to do that, but we're going to send you over to this computer science class where they're going to teach you C or Python so that you can understand how to control hardware, with more power. Or we're going to send you to this FPGA course so you can understand that at a deeper level. Or, introducing the IT students to PLCs and saying, hey, I know you're an IT student, but we're going to put you an intro to PLCs. It's a requirement. And you're going to have that so that when you come out, you have a common vernacular to discuss it. And again, that's one thing that I'm very proud of my alma mater and the faculty there is there's a lot of diverse programs all under the same umbrella, and they do a good job of not just putting up, fake walls and saying, these are the electronics kids, keep them over here, no.
Yeah.
And honestly, I have a mentor. She's since moved on to a different institute, but she had a class. It was a capstone senior level class, and she took someone from every major. You rarely had two of the same major on the same team, and you did a project together. And my project in that class was an Android app. We wrote
That's
an
awesome.
Android app for the biology department for bat identification. So bats are pretty big in Indiana. There's a lot of them, and my alma mater, the biology department, has a lot of knowledge around bats. And so our project, and that's what most of them were community focused. It was meet with the biology department, understand their need, and create an Android application for them and document it. And this wasn't just like a go build an app and move on. This was do the documentation, write the user's manual, write the technical build all of these things. And I had never done Android. I had never done project management. I had never done any of that prior to that day. But, like I told my professor, I adapt or I die. And that's my motto. And I think that's
Yeah.
what kids have got to have is, if you don't know anything about it, don't throw up your hands and say, I don't know anything about this. Go to Google, go to YouTube. There's so
Yeah.
much information available to you, right here on this little package that you can go and learn. And while it might not be the best, we used, I think, MIT's app developer. It's very much like a low code, no code. Oh, it's horrible. In retrospect, there was no UI, UX. Our color scheme was bad. But it gave me the understanding because they brought in a panel of judges to review, and we got that feedback. So there was someone during our review who was a UI UX expert. There was someone who was more knowledgeable in Android app development. And they told us, hey, well, what you did is great. This is probably what you should have done. And I think giving students that safe space to try and giving
Yeah.
them that feedback loop to understand what they could have done to improve it, that's critical. And again, my alma mater is very big on cross-functional teamwork and team building. And I think that that's imperative for students to come out and have the opportunities like I've had. Because again, most of my career has simply been patching IT to OT. My title has always been controls engineer, but the majority of what I've done in my career is very much either helping IT and OT talk or doing more of the OT networking and the less direct control stuff. But it very much is necessary to your point earlier as we bring these large systems online in a connected manner. So yeah, I think
Absolutely.
that's how you do it. Yeah.
It's awesome, man. Yeah, they gave me a couple of thoughts when you were saying that. I think cross pollination is super critical. I remember when I was in college, the double E department and the CS department were right next to each other, and they're both super small. So half my friends were CS guys, and that helped me not be as intimidated by structure, data structures and stuff like that. It's kind of intense from a CS standpoint for an EE, but if you cross pollinate like that, it takes a lot of that intimidation away. And then the other thing would be just curiosity. I think it's just so key, with any job that you have in the industry. Like stay curious and always be willing to learn as much as you can. Yeah, love it, man.
And
Um,
I don't think curiosity is fully on the student to come to the table with. I very
Yeah.
much believe it is on the educator as well to stoke that
Yeah.
curiosity, nurture it, and bring it to life. It's kind of like the old Boy Scout. You keep sparking the flint, and you get the little ember on there, and then you got to start, blowing and really getting it to catch fire. I think that the
Yeah.
student is responsible to spark it, but I think it's really up to the educator to help stoke it and turn that ember into a fire, in my opinion.
100% agree, man. Yeah, it's very easy to kill that spark if you get the wrong person or the wrong feedback or the wrong attitude at the wrong time. Yeah, that's a great message for sure.
I dropped out of college at 18. I can very much tell you firsthand that, yeah, it's very easy to lose that spark. But I'm not by any means blaming my educators. It's a two-way street. There is some culpability on the student to succeed. But at the end of the day, yeah, I think you're right that, it can be the wrong set of circumstances. And, you can hit that flint all day long and you're never going to see a flame.
Yeah, exactly. So you mentioned the Radio Shack 301 box. Is there any other cool tools that you found besides that one that you're excited about right now?
I mean, there's all kinds of cool tools in the industry. I really think, some are more in the level of what I would call toys, and some are more in the real world of, wow, you really could use this for some stuff. So,
Yeah.
to maybe blur that line, I think that a lot of people are aware of a device like this, a flipper.
Yeah.
And, you can do a lot of things with this. Just the other day, I used it to read the TPMS, tire pressure monitoring system from my car. I just driving down the road with this little thing. It has an app for TPMS. I know it's nerdy, but it was like, oh, cool. I can read the same frequencies my car reads. But then there's more realistic things. Work badges. Like your employee badge. It's RFID. This can copy it. I can skim my credit card number and expiration date by just simply running this over the back of my credit card. Copy hotel room keys. More of your trolling things. Turn on TVs, turn off TVs, turn up the volume, change the channel. But again, I've seen
Crazy.
this used to hack a Century safe. By abusing the serial connectivity because there is a GPIO patch right there, and so I'd be lying if I said I don't have the cables with the clips here to do that. Maybe I've tested it. We'd have to have another video for that. But I'm saying that this thing can be used to do actual harm in the industry.
Yeah.
But I think devices like that, it's imperative to get your hands on. But it's also imperative to get your hands on, non-hacking things just for tinkering. This is a Adafruit macro pad. I just unplugged it. But I have a macro for my volume knob and a bunch of hotkeys. Doing Logix programming, Control E, Control W. Some of the more commands you use for cross reference. Create new variable, things of that nature. Or even I picked this thing up a while back. It's a papered ink. It's a wireless, small Arduino with a good sized battery in it, and I used it to, they had a calendar app that was available, but then I went further and I've hooked up sensors from my house, whether that's temp or otherwise, and they display on there. And so, I could take this
Crazy.
thing downstairs and it'll still tell me what is the actual temperature in my room because it's pulling an API through a hardware abstraction layer that's actually then querying a Modbus IO-Link master. I have a Modbus IO-Link master under my desk, and my server acts as like a
How's one, bro?
HAL hardware abstraction layer to convert that all over in a secure manner to a RESTful API. And so then, if I want to write an Android app for my watch or my phone or this little desk calendar or anything, RESTful API is almost available on everything.
Yeah.
I'm able to then control the stack light that's in here, all the sensors get their values. And I think doing that, it's helpful. I just implemented a fast API framework on Python
Nice.
because I was like, I've done Flask, I've done Django. I want to build this using a new framework I've never used, kind of learn the nuances. And I just finished a hardware abstraction layer for my Modbus block down here for all my sensors and my stack light using Fast API and Ubicorn. I never used either of those previous, but went to the website, read the documentation, and said, "Hold my beer, I got this." And so, yeah, doing that, those are skills that are valuable. And understanding that, am I a programming expert? No. But if I'm in the room and someone's talking deep technicals now about, API, Swagger, or any of the, the buzzwords associated with it, I
Yep.
have an idea what they're talking about now because I've implemented it, not industrial, but still educational, I would argue, or academic, I would argue. And now I have that vernacular to discuss with them.
Yeah.
And I think you do have to be honest, though, in those conversations. Say, hey, not an expert. This is what I know. Help me get to the level you need me to be so we can do this right.
Yeah, exactly. Knowing what questions to ask is so important. Case in point, I knew this was going to be a great question to ask you because you're always into really cool stuff. And side note, the new title for this video is going to be "Hacking Century Safes" with Brandon Artz. So
Actually, the craziest one I saw for this wasn't even the Century Safe. This thing can create a square wave, and I'm not kidding you. The emergency lights. So when you're driving down the road and you see an ambulance coming and they get all the green lights, there's an infrared receiver up on the traffic lights. They simply are looking for, and it's sad the level of encryption, but they're literally looking for a square wave infrared signal at a certain frequency.
wow.
So I saw someone use this with a big LED light that they built, and they were able to use this to change the lights green. Now, again, highly illegal. They have cameras to take photos of the vehicle to activate them
Great.
for a reason. But I'm telling you, this thing,
That's
I
insane.
think that we have no idea the craziness that people could do with this because, again, it very much gets seen as like a kid's toy.
Mhm.
And I think a lot of people abuse it. They buy it to abuse.
Yeah.
So I think that there's a lot more that could be done with it. But I think it's great because it starts that conversation. And back to my statement earlier, it makes it fun. Is it
Yeah.
meaningful? Maybe, but it makes it fun.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah, man. That's awesome. Anything that the NSA tries to, you know, take when you're going through security, is pretty powerful. So
It has a dummy mode, and then it very much, when it loads, looks like a Tamagotchi. So you can see there's
yeah,
like a little dolphin on
so
there,
cool.
and it looks very much like a Tamagotchi. So when you put it in dummy mode, unless you know the button sequence to like undo it does nothing. And I think most of the time, until they really understand and this thing gets further visibility, they're going to assume it's a Tamagotchi. But I have a backup just for the case that if I ever go through TSA and they make the you can keep it and leave, or you can throw it away and get on the plane.
Yeah,
Depending where I am, I'm likely going to toss it. But thankfully, I have a backup in case they ever quit selling them.
got redundancies. Yeah, man.
Oh yeah,
So
yeah.
we'll go ahead and wrap up this last question. But what's got you most excited about the future of industrial automation and
I think it's
operational
twofold.
technology?
So to your question earlier about can this all be done hybrid, I think two technologies, and I think there's a lot of other interesting things, but to kind of tie this question back to that, I think the two things that are the most interesting are going to be augmented reality, and I'll talk on that in a moment, and then digital twin. And I know digital twin and augmented reality are things people talk about, they're buzzwords, but there's real world applications that are showing up everywhere. And again, like I said earlier, companies that adopt these early are going to succeed. So augmented reality, I think really using it for technicians for support is going to be key. So I personally have used, I can't think of the name. It comes with like a hard hat, RealWear. They're a company that does like augmented reality glasses. And at Stanley Black and Decker, we used RealWear during COVID, which gave a technician, a hard hat with a camera and a video screen where they could go stand in front of a machine. And from my side, I'm on Teams or Zoom, and we're talking. I'm seeing what they're seeing, and I'm able to draw and say, hey, right here on this thing, open that door and see if this light's on. Now, that was
Incredible.
2020. We've come a long way in the last 3 years. So now, being able to output like data on the machine, I've seen some videos where people use a cell phone, scan a QR code to get that index point, to tie it, anchor point or whatever you want to call it. And then all of a sudden, as they move, they're seeing the data laid out where it belongs. And that is going to help not only the technician and their job by sourcing prints, scan a QR code, and now you've got electrical prints on your phone. You're not reading a 30-year-old
Yeah.
print catalog covered in cutting fluid because someone forgot to shut the door all the way 5 years ago. So having it for the support for you personally to do your job, but then that remote element of bringing in your subject matter experts when the AR platform doesn't do it by itself. I think that's one that's really interesting and is really going to, very much push industry a lot further, a lot faster for making resources spread. But then the second is digital twin. I think digital twin offers so many opportunities. You can use it to build new machines, test new machines, and ballpark, performance long before they build anything. And I think that rapid innovation and rapid feedback is going to reduce the amount of plant floor time to the point earlier. And we're going to get, you and I both shown up on site for, an on-site commissioning. It was supposed to take 2 weeks and turned into 2 months. And at the end of 2 months, we're still going, it might be 2 months from now. I think that digital twin element is going to help pull that timeline tighter, make it more realistic. But then once the machine is running, you have the model, you have that support. Now you have a virtual environment where if someone jumps on a support call, they can jump in real time and see the machine virtually, drill down on sensors, drill down on this, that, and understand what is the state of the machine. They're not as reliant on the plant floor anymore to tell them, is there a case here, a part there, is there water in this valve, is it open, is it closed? So you're getting that, but then also you're able to use that digital twin, to your point earlier, with operations to show them the reality. And I think that's more of a macro view. And I've seen some software starting to show up where they have this plant level macro view of a digital twin, and it shows this is where all your WIP is. You can click on WIP and get the SKU, get the build number, the lot number, who supplied these parts, who supplied those subcomponents, things like that. But then you can also get all that other data that floats around in the industry, like OEE. What is the stuff in my ERP, my MES? You can bring them all under one hood and really help augment an entire facility. And so, yeah, I think those two by themselves, AR and digital twin, will very much help organizations, and more than just the engineering facet. I think it really enables operations and maintenance to really succeed at that point.
Yeah, 100% agree, man. It's exciting times. It'll be interesting to see, even in 5 years, where everything is. It's going to be wild.
It won't look anything like it does now. I mean, did 5 years ago, it didn't look anything like this. So back to the first statement I think I might have made about the moving target, blindfolded with darts. We don't have any clue where that thing's going. It's just to the point we made then. You got to stay on top of it. You got to stay in the know. And if you pull your blindfold off and you missed, don't get discouraged. Just put it back on and take another shot at it, because you've got to chip away, and no one gets it perfect up front.
Well, hey, man, I really appreciate your time. This is a super cool conversation. We need to do it again sometime.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Don't get me in any trouble with Flipper and all that. Again, this was all for educational or academia purposes, and we do things in a safe, secure manner.
Yeah, we'll have the legal team review this call before we send it out with the proper disclaimers at the end.
Yeah, if we ever go deep technical, yeah, we probably ought.